estudiantes, ¿cómo están? Estamos en semana 9. ¿Quién lo puede creer, no? Estamos ya a mitad del semestre y ahora les voy a hablar un poquito, ¿no? De unas diferencias entre el inglés y el español, entre los pasatiempos y los deportes y cómo se habla de eso en inglés y cómo se habla en español, ¿no? So this week we are in week 9. So hard to believe that we are already in week 9, right? I mean, it's crazy, but we're halfway through the semester, so almost there. Almost there, you know, just gotta power on through and get done. All right, so this week I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about some of the differences in the way that we talk about pasatiempos and deportes, so pastimes and sports, in Spanish as we do in English, right? So this week, I forgot my expo marker. So if you look in your book, right, in the back of each chapter, there's often a listing of vocabulary terms. So these terms that have to do with sports have the word jugar next to them, and then they have things like jugar voleibol, jugar fútbol, no? Jugar baloncesto. And sometimes what people will do is they will leave out this word. But this word is really important, okay? Because you're saying, right, you're playing that sport, right? It's something that you're doing. It's a physical activity that you're engaging in. So similar to how, when you were thinking about how your verbs needed to be conjugated in order to indicate an action, right? We need the word jugar here to indicate that it's something that we're doing. It's the same with ir, right? Sometimes people will leave off ir and not associate it with any of the other ones that it's listed with in the book, but we really need it, right? Ir a una fiesta, ir al teatro, ir de compras, no? We need this word ir here. If not, we're not saying that we're going to do it, right? We're not saying that that's something that we are currently engaged in this moment in time. One of the things that is also kind of a difference in the discrepancies between the way that we talk about things in Spanish and English is some of the words that we use to talk about sports and pastimes. So for example, we learned, whenever we learned regular AR verbs, that the word tocar means to play. Now, right, we have jugar voleibol, no? So how does jugar also mean to play? Well, tocar means to play, but only if we're talking about instruments. Jugar means to play anything that has to do with a physical activity. If you are involving your body in a physical activity, then you are jugando, right? So children play, children jugar, right, amongst themselves. And you jugar deportes, right? You play sports, but you tocar instrumentos, ¿no? Tocar el piano, tocar la guitarra, ¿no? Tocar el violín, etc. Okay, when we learned regular AR verbs as well, we learned the word tomar, which we learned can mean to take. If you wanted to say, right, I'm taking this class, tomo, ¿no? La clase de biología, los martes y los jueves. However, that word take is not a word that we would associate with necessarily with pictures always. And so the book uses a word sacar, which is more like to take out, right? But when you are taking a photo, right, you're taking a scene out of something and making an image out of it, right? So the physical action of it actually makes sense if you think about it, but we would say sacar fotos, no? You might be able to say tomar fotos, but that might be it would depend a little bit on the country, but for the purposes of the textbook, right, we use the word sacar. Okay, here's another one that is kind of interesting that sometimes people find a little bit confusing, is the word andar and montar, no? Because in English we have a verb that's to ride, right? So we might say, can you give me a ride? I'm gonna give so-and-so a ride, right? I'm gonna ride a bicycle, I'm gonna ride a horse, right? Those are things that, a verb that we would use. The word ride as a verb is not a verb that exists in Spanish in and of itself, right? You might hear sometimes people anglicize, or that kind of anglicization of the word ride into Spanish. So sometimes people will say things like, necesito un raite, no? But it's just, it's like an appropriation of the word ride into Spanish. And it can be used in a slang context or even in a colloquial context. But in this context, we would use other words to indicate the word ride in Spanish. So in English, we would say andar en bicicleta. The word andar does not necessarily mean to ride. Now in English, we would say to ride a bicycle, but andar en bicicleta, and that is a word that means to kind of like almost meander or go about, or you might say andar en el centro, no? So to wander around in the center of town, or andar en patineta, no? Right? So you can use the word andar anytime you're doing an activity that, or we're using it in this context, right? Because we would think of bicicleta as something that is a bit more of a leisurely activity, something that takes a little bit of time. And so that's why we would use this word andar. Now here, right, we would use the word montar a caballo. Montar is the word literally that means like to get on, right? So because in order to ride a horse, right, you have to get on it. In Spanish, we would say, right, to get on a horse is how you would say to ride a horse. This is a thing that happens, right, sometimes between languages where there is no absolute translation for something, right? For example, in Spanish, we often say before a meal, buen provecho. There's no real literal translation for that in English because it's not something that we say to each other before you eat. But it is something that you would say in a Spanish-speaking culture before you eat and before you would even take a bite, probably. It would just be polite to wait until everyone says buen provecho. Well, this is a kind of a similar thing, right, where there's no literal translation. There are all sorts of words that we used sometimes whenever we might use the word ride in Spanish. We might use words like subir, abordar, right, montar, or if we would say like to get off of something or to not ride or descender or bajar, right? So there are all sorts of words that we would use that would be a little bit more specific. I guess that's the better context of it, is that because Spanish is a much more specific language, often verbs include elements of what is the physical motion that the body is doing in whatever it is that the verb is talking about in the context. Whereas English tends to be a much more generalized language, and so we use overreaching verbs like ride that have a multiplicity of meanings, whereas in Spanish, words tend to have a much more one-to-one kind of contextualized meaning. Here's a final one, right, that is kind of interesting, right? Hacer can mean to do or to make. This can be sometimes confusing people if they think, right, oh, to make a picnic, right? But you're having a picnic with friends. In English, we would say, right, I'm gonna go have a picnic. But in Spanish, you say, I'm gonna do or make a picnic. And here, right, with exercise as well, hacer ejercicio. No, in English, you could say, I'm gonna go do some exercise. So that has a kind of a similar significance. But right, you might also, be making exercise with your body. So that's a kind of an interesting difference in the way that Spanish and English function. So I just wanted to talk about these little kind of small discrepancies in the way that we would talk about things so that people could be a little bit less confused. This week, this is what we're doing, where we're talking about pasatiempos, things that we like to do or don't like to do. Next week, we're going to be talking about gustar, tener, and ir. And so that's what next week's lecture will focus on. So I will see you in week 10. Ok, hasta la semana entrante.